Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Branching Out from STEM, the Growth of Open Access Scholarship, which is sponsored by CloudSource from COC Dynex. This session is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. Now I'll just put a couple of links in the chat for where you can register for upcoming webinars and watch previous webinar recordings. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. To adjust the size of the slides or video, you can use the divider in the middle of the screen to slide the sizes to your liking. Next slide. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our speakers or to share any comments. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions you like or would like to be addressed. Next slide. Also, there is closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom right corner of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version and where to access today's slides. And with that, we're ready to get started, so I will hand it over to Mariska.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here today. I know your time is valuable. We're going to be talking about branching out from STEM, the growth of open access scholarship. I am Mariska Conley. I'm the CloudSource Director of Partnerships and Communications here at COC Dynex, which means I work a lot with our content partners and our customers so that we can better understand your needs and where we fit into the landscape of library software. I'm a former academic librarian and have worked in systems, e-resources, and some instruction for both academic and medical libraries. Later in this presentation, you'll also get to hear from my colleague Rick Branham, who's the VP of Presales, Academic, and Content Solutions. He's been on the CloudSource product since its conception and has been working with libraries for his entire career. So also a very knowledgeable person. So let's begin with the roots of open access. So the traditional publishing model was fairly straightforward when the OA movement first started to gain traction. And really all of these steps still exist in one form or another, though the model is more complicated with transformative agreements and alternative publishing models today. The basic cycle includes funding, which is optional, of course, but a very common way to initialize the research efforts, especially in the sciences where conducting research can involve high costs. Research, whether that be lab research, data collection and analysis, systematic reviews, studies, whatever the method of research in a discipline, something happens to answer a question, explore a concept, test a theory, or just advance the field in some way. An article or other scholarly output is the next step in the cycle, followed by peer review, which is the most common system of checks and balances in academic conversations. Publishers rarely have specialized knowledge to evaluate whether the research has merit and value to the community, and to find obvious problems that might need to be corrected before it can be accepted or published. Publishers historically would then physically collate and print the articles, case studies, and other research. Of course, we do that online mostly today. And they oversee distribution via subscriptions and other sales models. Note that the proceeds do not come back to the scholars or researchers, and very rarely the peer reviewers. This very real work that was and is done by the academic community is considered to be a service to their profession. Finally, that research is hopefully read, cited, and reused by the academic community, thereby contributing to the conversation around a topic or research area. And that often, of course, leads back to further funding and research. In the early days, publication was almost entirely controlled by publishers. Before the internet and the ability to email, print, or self-archive your own works, it was nearly impossible to distribute your research widely without those tools. So publishers can be academic institutions themselves, such as university presses. They can be nonprofit or for-profit commercial entities. However, government agencies and professional organizations also have made their mark in modern publishing. Now, I know you know most of these things, but I wanted to start on the same foundation here before we got into the history of open access. So I've hinted a little bit about the reasons for and the problems with traditional publishing. So when the internet was born, many smart people realized that there was a chance to disrupt this model and put some of the power back in the hands of those people who create the research and really just wanted to distribute it without barriers. The history of open access can be told chronologically, of course, but I think there's value in sorting through these events and putting them into categories, words and actions. The first includes statements made by the community of scholars and other stakeholders. I'll point out that this is just a small selection of these statements. The conversation was and is pretty active, and many groups, large and small, had something to say about it. So the first noteworthy statement was in 1994, the subversive proposal was published by Stephen Hardman, calling on all authors of esoteric research to make their work available in anonymous FTP archives, which was a little radical. In 2001, 34,000 scholars around the world signed an open letter to scientific publishers, which called for the establishment of an online public library that would provide the full contents of the published record of research and scholarly discourse in medicine and life sciences as a freely accessible, fully searchable, interlinked form. In 2002, the Budapest Open Access Initiative was published, and this was a public statement of principles related to open access to the research literature. And in 2003, the Berlin Declaration of Open Access to Knowledge in the Sciences and Humanities emerged from a conference with 120 cultural and political organizations in Berlin. As you can see, the early conversation was very grassroots, originating from the concerns of the very people producing, reviewing, and using the research. And what was in those statements? Well, Dr. Harned of the University of Southampton in 1994 said, "It was only out of reluctant necessity that authors made the Faustian bargain to allow a price tag to be erected as a barrier between their work and its intended readership." The Budapest Open Access Initiative, which actually set out some possible paths to being fully open, including self-archiving and OA journals, made the assertion that the only constraint on reproduction and distribution and the only role for copyright in this domain should be to give authors control over the integrity of their work and the right to be properly acknowledged and cited. They weren't even asking for compensation, only acknowledgement and the free sharing of information. But what are statements and manifestos without action? Late in the 1980s and the early 1990s, as the internet was becoming widely available, the first open access journals began appearing in email listservs and news groups. 1991 brought Archive Physics, and this is a repository for articles in as you can tell, physics. It's honestly still alive and well today. The National Library of Medicine, NIH, made Medline freely available as PubMed in 1997. In 2013, the first Office of Science and Technology Policy Memorandum was released, calling on grant-funded publishing to be made freely available within a year of publication, which is likely, one of the origins of our one-year standard embargo we see so often in journals. 2015, the Department of Energy and National Science Foundation made plans to go public. In 2016, the European Union announced that all scientific articles in Europe must be freely accessible as of 2020. In 2018, 11 European funders organized under Coalition S announced Plan S, which requires all research output based on funding from these organizations to be published in fully open journals, going so far as to disallow publishing in hybrid journals. And in 2022, the Office of Science and Technology Policy updated their guidelines to make all federally funded research in the U.S. freely available with no embargo by the end of 2025, next year. You may have heard this called the Nelson Memo. I'm sure you heard me mention a lot of STEM organizations and publications on the last two slides. As you can imagine, since OA started in these disciplines, the OA landscape was heavily influenced by that early on. This is a breakdown of the top open access subject areas into 2003, when that Budapest Access Initiative and the Berlin Declaration on Open Access to Knowledge in the Sciences and Humanities had just been published. This represents how often those subjects appear in the OA articles that have been indexed for that time period. In a few minutes, we'll revisit these numbers, but I wanted to start with an OA landscape before the movement really got started. So unsurprisingly, you can see that medicine, thanks to NIH, and biology are dominating the OA articles, followed by a lot of STEM research. Physics being number 4, is likely due to archive. And the only non-STEM in the top 25 are philosophy, business, and political science near the bottom. Right there. So I'm going to interrupt this to take a really quick poll question here. What challenges are you currently facing when making OA discoverable? And there's several options here. Please check all that apply. Things like no central discovery, or the discovery doesn't include a whole lot of OA. Sometimes it's educating your staff and your users. There's often concerns over quality or other access challenges. Let's see what we've got here, I think. Just a couple more seconds to answer these, and we'll see where we are. I think I have some guesses about where we might land on some of these, although I think if I'd pulled this 5 years ago, it would be different. So no central discovery, and discovery doesn't include OA resources for sure. Educating patrons and concerns over quality, I think those tie together really nicely, because that is often where your patrons are concerned about using OA resources. And the truth is, hopefully this will give you some tools to address some of those. So thank you very much for answering those. So let's take a look where open access starts to change away from STEM and branch into other areas, and what that landscape looks like today. I've got one word for you here: funding. Oddly enough, the biggest driver of the current OA landscape is OA mandates attached to funding sources. Again, that shouldn't be a surprise to a bunch of academic librarians. The messages coming from the academic and research communities were heard loud and clear, and often set in stone. There have been studies and meta-analyses done around the cost of publishing, the budgets of academic institutions, what alternative publishing models the market could support, and the technological needs for OA to work. The Wellcome Trust, for example, commissioned a report called The Economic Analysis of Scientific Research Publishing that was released in 2003. The first line of which is, the current market structure does not operate in the long-term interests of the research community, echoing a lot of what you hear in those early statements and manifestos. They aren't alone in jumping fully on board with OA by mandating their research resulting from grant funding be made available to the public. Other funders you might know: the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Microsoft Research, the Dutch Research Council, the Australian Science Fund, the Kepler University, the Swiss Science Foundation, and of course Coalition S. And I mentioned them earlier, and they're an international consortium of research funding and performing organizations. And honestly, I would need a much larger slide to list everyone who has OA mandates now. Though the specifics vary a lot, researchers who want funding from these organizations are obligated to publish their findings under OA licensing, reinforcing a collective commitment to unrestricted access to scholarly output. Government and research agencies that fund research all around the world are also requiring OA publication models. So the NIH, who created PubMed to make medical and health research publicly available pretty early on, the National Science Foundation, the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, U.S. Geological Survey, the European Research Council, all federal government agencies in the US actually who support research now stipulate this condition. The European Commission has similar expectations, as do government agencies around the world. And where does OA stand today because of this? Well, there's a lot of open access out there, a lot. Over 63 million scholarly resources are open access, including articles, books, and data sets. Over 50 million of these are scholarly articles. 61% of all scholarly articles published since 2017, that's the more recent research, are OA. 3.7 million open articles were published in 2023 alone, making 67% of the scholarly articles published that year freely available. The graph on the right here illuminates an anticipated shift in scholarly communication by 2040, where nearly 100% of peer-reviewed articles are expected to adopt open access licensing. The primary driver behind this trend is those funder mandates. We hit 67% last year. That goal is closer than you might think. Remember this graph because we're going to come back to it later. As exciting as 63 million OA resources are, there's a flaw in the system. It's often hard to find it. If we looked just at scholarly journal articles, setting aside data sets, books, OER, non-scholarly material, you've got about 50 million articles spread across hundreds of thousands of publications and their websites. So let's dig into this a bit. Open access publishing types are classified by color, which I'm sure you know as well, and have been since the early 2000s. So if your paper is grant funded by one of the agencies with an open access mandate, you need to be considerate of that and select a publisher and terms accordingly. So your gold or diamond, as they're sometimes called, is a fully open journal or monograph. Normally, this involves fees paid directly to the publisher to ensure the article isn't behind a paywall. And those journal titles are fully open, meaning that all articles can be accessed freely. Under this umbrella is platinum and bronze, which is sponsored. Platinum is sponsored, and bronze, the fee is waived by the publisher, and they can appear in a variety of journals, not just open. Green open access typically refers to self-archiving by the author or deposit in an institutional repository. So these are often preprint versions that are functionally identical content-wise to the final published version, but can lack the publisher's formatting. But sometimes these can include post-print or even publisher versions. That's where your blue, which are post-print articles in an archive, and yellow, which is your preprint articles, come in, because blue and yellow make green, I guess. Finally, you've got white, which can't be archived at all, can't be self-archived, and black, which is our pirate group here, which refers to illegally released OA. And these kind of round out that spectrum of OA types. The Directory of Open Access Journals indexes the fully open titles, which is your gold ones right here at the top. But what about the green, bronze, and other colors of OA? Well, more often than not, you'll find them in hybrid journals sitting alongside closed access articles. This accounts for a whopping 84% of OA articles. This is important because many libraries think that they have your OA covered through their discovery or content provider. If you toggled on that DOAJ source in your discovery layer, what you probably have is only the DOAJ content. So you're missing out on the majority of open access content that's available. At this point, it probably won't surprise you to know the impact of so much open access publishing has changed the composition of academic databases, such as this one that many libraries actually subscribe to. This popular multidisciplinary database, that I won't read out the name, but you can ask me later, contains about 70% OA content. If you compare your closed to open articles published since 2017. So I'm not talking about fully open titles, but the articles within those journals. So the most recent cutting edge scholarship, and yes, this does represent a real database. We've done a lot of article to article comparisons on many major databases, and the amount of OA is significant in most of them. However, you won't see any of this content if you don't subscribe to the journal and it's not in the DOAJ. So most discovery platforms don't index just the OA portion of hybrid journals. It's all or nothing, which means you have to subscribe to get access even to the open content. And what we see when we look at the top ranked journals is that they have very high OA publication rates. So the top multidisciplinary journals, as ranked by SAMAGO in February, most of them are more than half OA, and many are just approaching or have become fully open access. We're seeing this discipline by discipline. The higher the rank of the journal in that discipline, the more likely it is to have a high open access publication rate, because of course, those are the people who are getting funding. And the largest publishers of open access content are the same publishers that have historically published the bulk of scholarly articles. They have high editorial standards, and they're not lowering them for OA. These journals publishers will always want to publish the best authors with the most interesting research. And most of them, again, are not pure OA journals, they're hybrid. These publishers have made room for the OA articles in their traditional subscription model that reside right next to articles that require access through a paid subscription, which means we would need a subscription to access all of it. More than 80% of open access content resides in these hybrid journals, and it is the highest quality content available. So remember that snapshot of subject headings from 2003? Here's what it looks like now. This snapshot is of the top 25 subject headings that was pulled from our CloudSource OA index just yesterday. Medicine and biology are still in the lead, but computer science is a close third, and political science, geography, psychology, philosophy, sociology, business, economics, humanities, all are present and accounted for. The landscape is completely changed at this point. And this is just your peer-reviewed articles. I'm sure you can imagine what it would look like if we pulled in books and textbooks and open educational resources. And this is what happens if we look just at articles published since 2017. We have computer science up in second place. Art appears for the first time in the top 25 subject areas. Law appears for the first time. Geology and surgery have disappeared from the top 25 entirely. What we see is that over the last few years, the subject areas in the body of global open access articles has started to shift towards an equilibrium between STEM and the other major academic disciplines. Side by side, it's easy to see the trend between all-time subject headings and how it's shifted towards more social sciences, arts, and humanities. The OA movement might have had its roots with STEM, but it's branched out and is now present and alive in every discipline and field. But what now? Where do we go from here? The answer is obviously up. In the US, the Nelson memo, that updated funding memo from the Office of Science and Technology Policy that I just mentioned, will make a big impact. This change will essentially remove the one-year embargo that has become standard in the publishing world for federally funded research publications. This isn't every OA publication by any stretch, but you'll recall that there are many, many grant funders out there, but the government funds a lot of research, so the impact is going to be felt. And earlier I showed you this graphic from an old post by our research team, which is affiliated with OpenAlex and Unpaywall, that was itself based on a study in PeerJ from 2018 called The State of OA, a large-scale analysis of the prevalence and impact of open access articles. This prediction model comes from the research, and it's a fascinating touchstone in revisiting the state of OA every few years just to see where we are right now. This prediction is that we'll reach near 100% OA by 2040. I say near because there'll always be a few holdouts. But from a statistical standpoint, we'll be as close enough as you can get. 2023 had about 67% OA licenses in their peer-reviewed articles. And I ran the percentages from 2003 to 2022 back in December before we had our full numbers for 2023, then let a basic forecasting model based on historical trends predict into the future if things continue the way they are until we reach that 100% OA saturation. It generated a conservative forecast plus a lower confidence bound if things slowed down or if journals started closing for some reason, and an upper confidence bound on the off chance that the OA trend is accelerated. And even the conservative forecast is ahead of where that older study suggested we'd be at that time. 2023's final OA publication percentage of 64% was on the upper confidence bound, so much faster than we would have thought based on the model. But even the conservative forecast predicts 100% OA by 2034, not 2040. It will be fascinating to look at where we are in a couple more years and check it against this model. But one thing is for sure, the predictions made in 2018 have been surpassed by the actual growth of OA in this time period. I'll actually be publishing these results in Impact later this year, but I will also upload my preprint article to cloudsource.net. So I'd be happy to share that with anyone who'd like to see it when it's finished. So please feel free to reach out. So an article was shared by one of my colleagues earlier this week that was actually just published on the 17th. And it was timely and illustrated a trend that's been happening since the beginning of this OA movement. The researchers and scholars are pushing back against the traditional publishing model. There's some fiery condemnations going back decades in the form of statements and open letters pushing back against the traditional scholars producing both the academic manuscripts and also giving freely of their labor to review them. To add insult to injury, they're often called up to, required to give up their author's rights in many ways to their own work. When the open access movement and the shaking up of this model happened, the burden has once again fallen on libraries and scholars to take on the greater part of the labor in making scholarship open and available, often in the form of author publishing fees that can be anywhere from $1,000 to $12,000 for a single article. And the latest pushback has come in the form of a federal antitrust lawsuit against 6 of the largest commercial publishers of academic journals. This lawsuit alleges 3 main complaints, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I encourage you to read the full document linked to my references page. It's fascinating. So the first complaint, not paying scholars for peer-reviewed services and tying their participation to being eligible for publication in the journals. Publishers agreeing not to compete with each other, which forces scholars to submit to one journal at a time and wait for these slow review processes to happen. And also preventing scholars from owning their own works and sharing their research freely. They assert that they are being required to sign away their rights. Whatever has come in the last couple of decades since the first call for open access and disruption of the traditional publishing model, we are clearly not finished with this climb. In 10 years, open access might not be the struggle it is right now for researchers and librarians. And we'll have truly unrestricted access to the wealth of scholarly information out there. However, you don't have to wait until then to make sure that you have access to the global body of OA and OER and continue to get the newest and best research that comes out of open publishing. So before I turn this over to Rick, I want to throw up one more poll question here. What innovations would make discovery of OA easier for your users? I realize again, this is kind of open here, but based upon your interactions with your students, your faculty, your patrons, a comprehensive OA index that has everything available, no authentication. I know sometimes that can be a barrier. Advanced searching strategies, what kinds of things here would be useful for you? And once again, you can select as many as you want on this question. And hopefully we'll get some good information about where the struggles are. Give it just another moment. See what we get. Here we go. All right. Unsurprising here, integration into your discovery layer catalog. That's a huge one. Comprehensive OA index, because right now you'd have to go to so many different websites to find everything. I mentioned 102,000 journals. No authentication and login. Advanced search, including Boolean. I love it. All right, thank you so much. So let me turn this over to Rick to show you CloudSource and see if it answers any of those needs.
Great. Thank you so much, Mariska. And let me just realized I was on the wrong.
It happens to the best of us.
Yes, it does. So we'll go ahead and flip over.
Perfect.
Great. Bear with me one moment. Adjust my windows. Okay, carrying on from where Mariska left off, let's take a look at how CloudSource solves some of these problems Mariska identified and stands up to the challenges or the needs that she mentioned. So CloudSource is a new content platform from Circe Dynix. You may know Circe Dynix from our many years of providing ILS and discovery and analytic solutions. We're a software house essentially, and this is our first content platform. This is part of our library services platform called Blue Cloud, and it offers comprehensive aggregation, enrichment, management, and discovery of resources for all library types. And I'm going to give you just a taste of how this looks in the patron interface in just a moment. But there are basically 2 offerings with CloudSource. First is the comprehensive OA index, And as Mariska mentioned, we're about 63 million plus resources right now. It grows almost daily. And that includes articles, proceedings, reports, etc. The index also includes open ebooks and open e-textbooks and open educational resources, or OER. We also offer, and it just went live mid-year, CloudSource Plus. CloudSource Plus expands on that OA index by adding subscription content plus options for on-demand fulfillment. And there are more than 1 billion records that cover non-OA scholarly content, magazines and trade journals, non-OA ebooks, multimedia materials, and news sources. So it really rounds out the index to include everything a library would want to offer through discovery. So we're not simply aggregating and passing along this OA content. We are enriching the content. We have various partnerships with organizations around the world to provide expanded metadata that includes open access links and DOIs and publication information. Field of study categories. Now, these field of study categories are in conjunction with the Open Alex project from our research. Those are the unpaywall people. And that carries on the work started by Microsoft Academic Graph. And it uses AI tools to add subject categories to article level records. It includes other subject headings, say from NIH, abstracts, author information, affiliation, citation information, web reviews, and other related resources, all things to support a comprehensive discovery. So we're going to take a look, but again, I'll point out that these are about 63 million OA resources from 102,000 plus peer-reviewed journals, open ebooks, e-textbooks, and other OER. And I'm going to talk through the various features as we do this brief example. So researchers can start with a general keyword, or they can choose a specific field to search. You can search artificial intelligence in this example. About 1.7 million hits. We also tie in Wikipedia to give you a grounding on whatever it is you've searched. You can choose various filters to narrow the results. So I could choose journal articles if I wanted. I'm going to click peer review to narrow my result set a little bit down to just shy of 1 million hits. And I'm going to search within the result set. I'm going to search for bias and how that plays with artificial intelligence. This first hit you see here, a lot of good information on the brief hit. There's also this status bar that indicates the peer-reviewed status, the license, citation metrics, web reviews. It's worth noting that with one click, every hit, one click takes you straight to full text, no authentication required. I can also go to the publisher site. I can build a citation, more than 2,500 citation styles to choose from. And you can put your own citation, style notes. The user can annotate the citation before copying it to their clipboard or exporting it in RAS format. So I'm going to make a few stylistic changes, and then I can copy that to my clipboard or export it to RefWorks or Mendeley or what have you. I can also do a permalink if I want to save that or share it with others. We also integrate with browsing for additional browsing of that journal. Here's a detailed view of that record. Again, all that same information we covered, but you see the results of our expanded metadata tools, locations, abstracts, author notes, references. References super important. You often find some of your best research from following the reference trail. And in fact, with one click, I can open all these references in a separate tab. So easy viewing, cited by articles published with in that issue, buzz from various sources around the web. Here's an article from Scientific American. Okay, lots of great tools to support your end user discovery. We think we've done a good job at making this simple and intuitive. Again, always one click to go to full text, no authentication required. If you're in an academic library, this is a great tool that you can make available to your alumni, for instance. We've also added to the index vetted books in OER. So we work with partners such as OAPN, DOAB. We often add special collections if they're not already part of our current index. We've added Open eTextbook from Open Textbook Library. That also includes textbooks from OpenStax and CLO, just to name a couple. And we also work with and support their efforts of OER Commons to pull in online courses, videos, activities, worksheets, etc. So let's take a look. Same search tool, same index. I'm searching for social media literacy. And on the results, I will use my format facet if I want to drill down to books, for instance, if I want to narrow down to book chapters, OER. I also have other OER facets that I can use, like the course level, the OER material type. You can see that it's widely varied in terms of the type of resources that are included, and OER primary user. Let's go back and choose course level, and I'm going to select as if I were an academic user. And that'll narrow my results to about 400 hits. And let's take a look at the one here at the top. Again, a little more information about that, the licensing, the summary of what's included. And again, I can go right into this OER a resource, which is a textbook. Let's close that. Now I could have also used the material type and gone right to a textbook if I wanted to narrow those results. But let's clear that facet and look again at the material type. So if I wanted to choose full course, I'm able to quickly jump to online courses, all things to that can provide supplemental materials to your instructors, to students that are looking for some additional help in their studies, or to any other audience type that you may be working with. Okay, so that was just a very brief look at the end user facing tools. We also have in the platform collection management tools. So this allows you as a staff member to curate collections. So it's not an all or nothing. You can control exactly what appears to your end users and even build multiple collections along discipline lines or targeted to different audiences, different libraries on campus. There's online usage reporting that uses the latest counter 502 format, and all your usage you can run in one place on demand. And if you're using our CloudSource Plus option, then we have complete holdings management tools. So link resolver, support for proxy servers, and all the functions that facilitate full text linking of licensed resources. But let's talk about some key takeaways. We've covered a whole lot of territory today, but here are some key things I want you to remember. OA is a grassroots movement. So it was from the initial open letters and statements explaining how scholarship should be freely available for the good of humanity to the antitrust lawsuit that was filed this week. Scholars and librarians are still making their voices heard, but this movement isn't over. It's just getting warmed up. OA may have started with STEM, but the top 25 most frequently appearing subject headings now include law, business, art, humanities, philosophy, and a variety of non-STEM disciplines. The message is OA is for every researcher in every library. The speed at which scholarly research is becoming open is actually progressing a lot faster than predicted just a decade ago. We could have near 100% open access for scholarly resources in the next 10 to 15 years. You don't have to struggle with trying to find OA online or hope you subscribe to a hybrid journal so you can get access to high quality research. You can find the global body of OA in CloudSource OA's index today, all available with one click and no authentication for your end users. Many libraries can make the OA the core of your collection strategy with subscription journals and databases strategically chosen based on your users' research needs. We can provide a free collection analysis to help you determine how much of your content subscription content is available in the CloudSource OA index. I'm going to repeat that again. At cloudsource.net, our website, there at the top of the page is a link to collection analysis. Here's where we can, again, take your subscription databases, run a comprehensive process, and tell you exactly how much of that is OA. And we'll break it down by subject discipline and by journal title as well. So whether you find a lot of overlap or a little, the information can help you make smart collection development decisions going forward. I think we have another poll question for you, Mariska. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I'd love to. So, and this your answer might have changed through the course of this, but how important are OA and OER in your collection strategy right now? And I realize that many of you may not be administrators, you might not be making library policy, but kind of based on context clues, does your library talk a lot about OA? Do you promote it on your website? Is it really important to you somewhat? Have you really not thought about it too much? And just one answer on this one, but we'd love to see kind of where people are on their feelings on OA right now. We've got some great questions coming up too in the Q&A too, Rick. So we'll dive into those next. Let's see where we're at. Very important. I love it and somewhat important. I'm so glad to hear that. And those of you who haven't given it much thought, hopefully some of what we've talked about today will, kind of be enlightening and maybe encourage you to nudge some of your directors and deans to take a closer look, because OA has come a really long way in the last, 10 or 12 years. So definitely worth looking at again. Okay, so let's jump into our Q&A. And if you've got something pressing, please, send it our way. We'd love to talk to you more about this. So Kelly asks for the cited references. I assume you can't read the full text for those that aren't OA. And I definitely wanted to leave that up here for live answering because it gives us a chance to talk a little bit about the difference between CloudSource OA and CloudSource Plus. And feel free to jump in if you want to at any point, Rick. But Rick went over it a little bit in here, just kind of laying out the difference. But if you're a CloudSource OA user, absolutely, you can answer, you can click on something and get full text every time, which is amazing for kind of preventing that barrier to access. If you are a CloudSource Plus user, now this is a full discovery platform that integrates your subscription content as well. So you may have things in there that you subscribe to. You'll have the full body of OA, which is already revolutionary compared to what you usually get with a discovery platform. But you also have options to integrate your ILL. You can use document delivery. So you configure it the way you want to. If everything you want your users to see needs to be full text, configure it to only cover your subscriptions and only cover the OA. If you want to give them the option to request things through ILL or CCC or Article Galaxy Scholar or on-demand services, you can do that as well. So it is very customizable about what you want your user experience to be like. Anything you want to add to that, Rick?
No, that's a great question. Again, if you're only subscribed to our OA platform, then you're only going to see articles that contain a direct link to full text. If you're using CloudSource Plus, then we'll include everything you want to make available: licensed content, options for getting for doc delivery, for online fulfillment. All those are turned on according to your needs with the CloudSource Plus product.
Yeah, the user experience is huge to us, though. We don't want to add frustration. We're on board with you on that.
Yeah, we, our approach is from the perspective of a software provider. So our intent is to build a discovery platform that's going to surface all of that OA content and make it readily available to your end users with as few clicks as possible. And we're not trying to promote subscription databases or guide you to clicking on subscription content. It's not in our interest to do that, as opposed to others who are in this discovery space. And that really ties into the next question from Susan about cost. I want to make it clear that CloudSource OA is a set of tools. It's a platform, and our costs reflect that. We're not charging you for content. It is free and open content. We're charging you appropriately to support our efforts in delivering all this comprehensive aggregation, enrichment, collection management, discovery of these OA tools. But just reach out to, you can go to cloudsource.net, or you can send an email to either of us if you'd like, and we'll put a quote in your hands in very short order, Susan.
And Susan also asked, does this discovery tool filter out predatory journals? And that is, leads into a lot of, I think, the reluctance that people have in the OA sphere to, and for good reason, because early on there was a lot less work being done to really filter things. But we have a few things in place that we do to assist with that. For one thing, when Rick was doing the demo, I'm sure you saw the little widgets that indicate whether something is peer reviewed or not. You can decide as a library to turn off anything preprint or anything you don't want in there. We discourage that because there's so much good material in there. But we also work with cross-ref data so that we are ensuring that what comes in has been filtered. Anything that is marked as peer reviewed, we are pretty confident you're going to be fine with using that. Anything that's not, we let you know it's not peer reviewed. OER can be, an interesting category because, of the nature of that particular type of resource, but everything is marked appropriately. And we are doing active work all the time on this index in order to look for things that might be questionable, in order to filter out anything that we aren't sure about. So there's a lot less work on your side as a librarian to go, should I share this OA resource on my website? Because we have librarians and experts on our end who are also going through our index content regularly to evaluate what's in there and look for any issues. So we watch Retraction Watch. We keep on top of those things so you don't have to.
Exactly. Good answer. And I'll just jump into Amy's question. As financial constraints force librarians to drop titles, what are vendors doing to help libraries make OA content available? Libraries can't shoulder the entire burden. Well, Amy, we couldn't agree more. And perhaps not surprisingly, the other big discovery vendors in our industry have a conflict of interest. And I think that's completely fair to say. Their financial livelihood, for the most part, depends upon subscription revenue. So it's in their absolute interest to keep you from dropping titles. And we are coming at this from a different perspective. Again, we provide software. We don't have any stake in subscription content. We want to make sure all of this OA content is available to you and is an absolute tool in your toolbox for keeping quality content in front of your end users. And we again can help you through our collection analysis tool, which is Michelle's next question.
Yep. I was about to say that. Yeah, there is absolutely no cost to do that. We sometimes get a rush of people after one of these webinars, but please pop over to cloudsource.net. It's up there on the screen there. And one of the first 3 buttons you're going to see at the top, I think it's the third one over, is collection analysis. And really all we need from you are your databases, the vendors they come from. It's very simple to get it started. If we have any questions, we'll reach out. But we've been doing this for a while, so we've got a really good idea of what's in those databases. And we'd love to, break it down for you and let you know what you have is OA, where the overlap is. And also, I think one of the most important things about the collection analysis is we'll let you know what expanded content you get with CloudSource OA, because you might not have any idea how much is out there. So we'll tell you what you have that's OA, and then we'll tell you what additional content you could get. So it's a really interesting report to get. And we'd be happy to sit down and go over it with you when we're done.
Right. And then Heather asked a question: do you evaluate the kind of peer review done, the time and distance between submission and peer review? Currently, what we're capturing, Heather, is the status as currently indicated on the metadata. So peer reviewed, not peer reviewed, or unknown. It may not be surprising that often when an article is published, the sources, the publishers, may not indicate the current peer-reviewed status, because that goes into a bucket of unknown. But we run regular deltas to update the metadata, and that tends to be corrected in a subsequent version of the record. So typically that unknown status is temporary and gets updated with its current peer-reviewed status. In CloudSource, we kind of went through it very quickly, but there's one of the tabs as you're looking through the records is all the links to that article or to that resource. And so we will show you, if available, the published versions from whatever sources, and also the various preprint versions, for instance. And so we make those freely available to you, and often those versions will indicate more information about peer review.
Yeah, I want to add something to this, talking about peer review. I mentioned earlier that OER can be a little bit more nebulous. It's just less well established as academic journals. So we, kind of internally had a question about one of our sources for OER about 2 months ago, I guess. So what I did, and I have a background in one of my degrees is in education. I am qualified to write lesson plans, but I didn't use any of my qualifications. What I did is I submitted a couple of wet lesson plans to one of our OER sources, leaving out my qualifications, but otherwise I thought a pretty decent submission, and waited to see what they would ask of me, where they would challenge me, what would happen. And they absolutely did. So I was curious, since it's not always clear what the criteria are, what happens if you submit an OER lesson plan? What are they looking for as far as professional qualifications? What are they looking for in the quality of the resources? And, so we are, we're trying to be really on top of what goes into our content sources, so that we know that what goes into CloudSource is quality.
Great point, Mariska.
Let's see, do we have any others? Yeah. All right, so we had an internal question here. You mentioned CloudSource Plus launched about 6 months ago. It might be too early to tell, but what's been the engagement like with new sources like multimedia options and magazines? So we are constantly working with content partners, especially to bring in things that are less journal articles, and OER can be fairly straightforward, but we want to bring in more news sources. We want to bring in more multimedia. So that is something that is ongoing constantly. And part of what my position covers is negotiating with our content providers. So gosh, what do you have to add to that, Rick? I feel like I'm tripping over my own tongue.
We've been very active, and our index now is at about 1 billion records. So we have been working diligently to expand way beyond just the OA content, so that we can fully support your research needs. And so our index does now include these various multimedia options and news sources from wherever you get the content, and the engagement has been excellent. So although we just launched actually end of July, so less than 6 months ago, we have now about 100 libraries that are using our CloudSource Plus discovery option. And again, that shows that there is definitely an interest and need among libraries to include OA as part of their collection development strategy, and not have OA minimized or even hidden, which is the current approach by many discovery vendors in this space.
Absolutely.
So we're standing up and challenging the current state of discovery by putting OA forward, and by also supporting a library's need to have a comprehensive index. So we're really excited about what we've been able to accomplish, and we'll continue doing so.
Yeah, there's also a question about outreach and marketing resources available for libraries looking to implement CloudSource. And I am so excited to talk about this one. We firmly believe in supporting you after you go live as well with this product. So we actually have a suite of monthly, we put out digital marketing resources that you can use to promote it. We know you're busy. We know coming up with something to post on your website or your social media, to encourage your users to visit a resource and to use it can take sometimes effort we don't always have. So we prepare, packages of digital marketing, usually themed around topics of the day or or the month, to give you text, images, links, guides to put things on your social media. We have a library a relations manager within our team that works with our customers even after they go live to help answer questions and make sure that you know how to pull your usage stats, that you know how to promote your CloudSource resource on your website. So we try to not just push you out into the out of the nest like a baby bird. We're going to definitely help you in promoting your resources as you go forward. It's no good having 63 million OA resources if you're not able to find them and use them.
Yeah, and they were still at a stage with OA adoption in that there is quite a bit of education to do. I think as a society, we're kind of conditioned to consider free things lesser quality. And it certainly, I hope Mariska has enlightened everybody. That's not the case with OA publishing. This is just a different type of license that is being driven by other, factors such as funding and what have you. It's
absolutely
same quality. It's just delivered with an open access license.
Yeah, and I do want to give a shout out to the fact that we try to be active contributors to the conversation around OA. Like, we firmly believe that this is where publishing is going, and so we do actually do an OA masterclass every month as well, and try and bring in speakers from the publishing world and from the OA world to kind of talk about innovations and what's happening. And those are just little 30-minute, lunch break webinars that you can use to kind of keep on top of what the trends are in the OA world. Just going forward. So again, we try and constantly be educating and learning ourselves.
That's right. And at cloudsource.net, there is a calendar of upcoming masterclass webinars and other webinars and a weekly deep dive. So every Wednesday at 10 Mountain Time, we provide a deep dive. So we show you much more comprehensively the end user interface, and we also go through the staff tools and just really explore the functionality of the platform more deeply and answer your questions. So we'll hope you'll sign up and join us for that as well.
Yeah, I think we're around just about out of time. Is there anyone else who has any questions? So Rick and I can talk about this all day long. Find us at a conference. We'll absolutely talk your ear off.
Right.
All right. I think that might be everybody.
Yep.
Great. Well, thanks so much to Mariska and Rick for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to our attendees for your questions and your comments. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the slides, a link to the recording and the slides, which includes a list of resources. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we would really appreciate it. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the webinar and hope to see you again in the near future on another session.
Thanks so much, Sabrina. And thank you for mentioning the references. Please look at those. There's good things in there.
Thanks. Thanks, Sabrina and Ashley. Great job, Mariska.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.